Our lesson this morning comes from the Gospel of St. Matthew, the second chapter. These will be familiar words to you, but see if you can hear them with some fresh ears this morning. Listen, if you will, for any words that will sort of punch out at you. You may be surprised. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly, found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child, and as soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed, and on coming into the house, they saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God. Well, this is a pretty weird story, isn't it, really? I know it's Christmas and you're supposed to be reverential, but this is just an odd story, if you think about it. Full of dreams and secrets and palace intrigue and odd characters, and of course, an evil villain who's not who he says he is, who's not what he says he is. Worse than any scary ruler in a Disney or Marvel film. And this is a story that's often got a bit confused over the years, conflated with other accounts, all thrown together like a Christmas fruitcake in the popular remembering of it. How often have you seen a nativity set like the beautiful ones in our display case downstairs, or watched a nativity play like what our children did last week, and found them there, those three kings of Orient, standing right alongside the mangy shepherds, along with the sheep and the barnyard animals and even angels, all crammed into that little barn in Bethlehem where Jesus Christ was born. Only it's not exactly true, is it? First of all, Jesus probably wasn't born in a wooden barn at all. Simple reason, they didn't have wood to build such structures in that part of the world. Most likely, he was born in a cave or a hollowed out part of a hill that serves as a holding pen for animals. We don't like to think of Jesus as a caveman, but he was. That's where most people kept their flocks. At best, the Holy Family were hunkered down in the courtyard of somebody's little house where the animals would be brought in to spend the night. Even so, the Magi didn't arrive on the night of Jesus' birth. Sometime later, maybe a month later, long after those shepherds and even the angels had all gone home, Matthew 2 begins with the words, "After Jesus was born," Jesus having been begotten. And verse 11 says the Magi found the child in the house, the oikon, where he and his parents had moved following his birth, which means that presumably Jesus wasn't lying in a feeding trough or in a manger anymore either. And I don't want to ruin this for anybody, but Jesus was not born on December 25th. Okay? He wasn't even born in December. Well, that ruins all of our Christmas cards, right? And the snow and all of that. But if the animals were out in the fields, that meant it was probably summer. So all along, Christmas in July has been right. I was go out this morning and ask around, how many wise men or kings were they? And 4 out of 5 people will tell you, well, there were 3, of course. Some of them will even name them. Casper, Balthazar, Melchior. Totally made up. But despite the well-known Christmas carol, the Bible itself doesn't actually say that. It doesn't tell us how many were in that traveling party, whether there were 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 10. It just says that there were 3 particular gifts which they brought as their treasures. That's another interesting word. Literally, it's the word thesaurus. You remember that word from high school English, right? It means literally a storehouse, something you put things in, a vault. Only this wasn't a thesaurus of adjectives, but of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, smimon, particularly potent fragrance, often noted, used for embalming. But it was also a symbol of romantic desire because it becomes sweet when it's fired up. So who were these magi? However there might have been of them. That's not clear either. The word itself, magos, magoi, suggests a variety of meanings. One Greek historian who lived 5 centuries before Christ says they were a part of the Median tribe in Persia, as in the Medes and the Persians, if you remember the story of Daniel. Daniel 2:2, in fact, mentions that when the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, where Daniel had been exiled as a youth, couldn't sleep one night, that he summoned all of the astrologers and magicians and enchanters and sorcerers to come interpret his dream for him. The Magoi would have been some of them. And if the words magi and magic sound similar, that's not a coincidence. The Magi were magicians of sort. But Magi can often refer to teachers and to priests and to physicians and to wise men of the Persian religion. Plutarch tells us the term was used not just among Persians, however, but all over the ancient world to refer to a profession of sorts. Later on in the New Testament, Magi are generally viewed in rather unfavorable terms. You see them in Acts 8, Acts 13, the stories of Simon Magus and Elymas, 2 kind of con men drifters. About the only thing the Magi weren't, in fact, were probably kings. As the Reverend John Henry Hopkins chose to call them when he wrote what became the first widely popular Christmas carol composed in America in 1857. To be fair, the good Reverend may have been thinking of some Old Testament verses, 72nd Psalm perhaps. The kings of Tarshish and of the isles shall pay tribute. The kings of Arabia and Saba shall offer gifts, including gold from Arabia, the psalm says. He might have been referencing Isaiah 60 verse 6, which prophesied that the wealth of the nations would come to the Messiah. A multitude of camels from Midian and Ephah and Sheba would come, bringing gold and frankincense and bearing good news of the praises of the Lord. So the guys who came to Bethlehem, whenever they got there, probably were not kings. It's just easier to costume kids like a king than an ancient astrologer? Where do you find those costumes? See, what we do clearly know is that they came from the east, the Anatole. The term quite literally means the place where the sun rises, the day spring, if you will. But how far east, we could wonder. If it was all the way from Persia, Babylon, where Daniel had lived, that would have been about 1,000 miles or so. Several-month journey. But it's possible as well. The Magi were actually Nabateans, descendants of Ishmael. You remember him, the other son of Abraham, who was born of a slave woman, Hagar, before Isaac came along. Ishmael is sometimes thought of as the ancestor of the Arab nations, and Isaac is of the Jewish tribe. And Nabatea, some of you have been there. Many of us have seen it in a popular film. For when Indiana Jones rounded the final bend of that tortuous narrow canyon and came riding up on horseback to that ancient city carved in stone known as Petra, that was Nabatea. That was one of the cities of the Nabateans, maybe their capital. So if the Magi had come from Petra, it would have been a much shorter trip. Only 100 miles or so. Isn't it fascinating to think it's possible that when Christ was born, somehow the long separated family tree of Abraham all came back together as if they had been waiting for centuries to do so, which in fact they had been. But what made the Magi take the journey in the first place? Matthew says it was the rising of a star. Okay, now spoiler alert, stars don't actually rise. Okay. The ancients just assumed that the entire celestial sphere rotated around us each one day, going from east to west. They didn't realize it was the earth itself that was rotating in the opposite direction, going from west to east. Still, when the Magi scanned the skies, what caught their eye was a configuration they hadn't seen before. The Greek text calls it a star, asteros, something that had a star-like appearance at least, though it did not behave like a star. And so some over the years have said that it was actually a comet. And ancient Chinese records say there was a very prominent comet that appeared around 5 BC, roughly the same time period. That would have indeed traveled slowly through the sky and maybe could have stood over Bethlehem, as verse 9 suggests. Others said, no, what the Magi saw was the rare triple conjunction of the bright planet Jupiter with the star Regulus in the constellation of Leo. That was my first thought too, by the way. That idea is full of astrological symbolism that might have suggested to a Persian magus, magoi, that a king was born in Judea, because Jupiter symbolized kingship. And sometime around 3 or 2 BC, it passed 3 times very closely to the brightest star in the constellation of Leo the lion, Leo which symbolized Judah, a lion's cub according to Genesis 49. Whatever the case, it was enough to make those Magi settle up their camels and start moving westward. And when they got to Jerusalem, it was likewise enough to make Herod, whose middle name was Paranoia, nervous as well. When he found out what the Magi were looking for, Matthew tells us that the king was disturbed. Terrasso means to put something into motion, to agitate it, back and forth, to shake it to and fro, to stir it up inside, to cause an inward commotion, extreme anxiety. It's such a powerful word that is actually used to translate 46 different Hebrew words in the Old Testament. Herod was disturbed. In the same way, Darth Vader once said to a skeptical general who sneered at the old Jedi ways in the original Star Wars movie that he found his lack of faith disturbing, after which he proceeded to use the Force to strangle the man from across the room. No wonder when Herod was troubled, all Jerusalem was troubled with him. And so after calling in the chief priests to tell him where the Messiah was to be born, Herod had no clue. He was an Idumean, an Edomite. He never read the scriptures. When he found out where the Messiah was to be born, Herod called the Magi back. And here's the word that jumped out at me: secretly. Why do you call them secretly? He's the king. He can do whatever he wants to, right? Called them secretly to find out the exact time the star had first appeared. Secretly, Lathra, Joseph too, had secretly planned to divorce Mary and put her away when he found out she was pregnant before an angel of the Lord told him not to. Nicodemus came to see Jesus secretly in the night. Lots of secrets here. Jesus said, what we whisper in private rooms will one day be shouted from the housetops. And despite his little secret, Herod had no intention of going to worship the Christ child. He only wanted to know where to find him to kill him. But God had a different plan for those magi. We ought to notice he even held the miracle of Christmas several days for them until they could finally get to Bethlehem and see it for themselves. Sometimes you kind of have to do that, don't you? When our first grandchild was born in England, he was due on December 19th. And since you can't just jump on a plane and get there instantly, for the only time in my ministry, we took Christmas off and we went to England and we got there in time to be there for the baby's birth on December 19th, which didn't happen. It didn't happen December 20th or the 21st or the 22nd or the 23rd or the 24th or the 25th or the 26th or the 27th or the 28th or the 29th or the 30th. On the 31st, we threw away baby's first Christmas ornament. Wrong year now. We had to go home on January the 10th. Jedediah made his appearance on Epiphany, January the 6th. We held the celebration for him, baptized him on the 8th, got on the plane on the 10th. Sometimes you have to do that. Isn't it great of God to hold Christmas till the Magi could finally get there? They had to get there because you see, they had to see it for themselves. And in the end, that's what all of us have to do, isn't it? We have to see the significance of this child's birth for ourselves. One of my favorite Christmas songs came out of the 60s, written by a husband and wife team with some great names for Christmas: Noel Regney and Gloria Shane. Noel was a Frenchman who, following the collapse of that nation, was drafted by the Nazis in World War II. He deserted, joined the French resistance. And then after the war, he came here to America in 1952. He met his wife-to-be, Gloria, and the two of them began writing for early television programs and radio jingles. He would compose the music, she'd write the words. They even had a few hits along the way. Rain, rain, go away, sweet little darling. But then in 1962, Something happened which caused them to completely vary their routine. Noel wrote the lyrics and Gloria wrote the music. Because in October of that year, the world held its breath while the Soviet Union and the United States faced off in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Russian missiles 90 miles from Miami. And in response, Noel wrote a song which he intended to be a prayer for peace. He felt so strongly about it that he couldn't even listen to the song after he wrote it for a long time without breaking up. For Noel had heard the voice of God. And so he simply asked others, do you hear what I hear? You know the song. Said the night wind to the little lamb, do you see what I see? Away up in the sky, little lamb. A star, dancing in the night with a tail as big as a kite. Said the little lamb to the shepherd boy, do you hear what I hear? Ringing through the sky with a voice, shepherd boy. A song high above the trees. A voice as big as the sea. Said the shepherd boy to the mighty king, do you know what I know? In your palace warm, mighty king, do you know what I know? A child shivers in the cold. Let us bring him silver and gold. Said the king to the people everywhere, listen to what I say. Pray for peace, people everywhere. The child sleeping in the night. He will bring us goodness and light. Or as the prophet of old Isaiah so beautifully promised, that child will be called the Prince of Peace. Isn't peace just precisely what this world so desperately needs this morning? Maybe it's what you so desperately need this morning in your life as well. Soviet Union is long gone. Cuba is relatively quiet. But this time the sabers are rattling across the border between Russia and the Ukraine. The Chinese are sending their fighter planes closer and closer to the island of Taiwan. In Haiti, they're picking up the pieces from a massive gas tank explosion that killed at least 62 people, wounded dozens more. It happened after bystanders swarmed the vehicle to collect spilled fuel, a precious commodity in a nation that has been beset by shortages of everything. In Kentucky, they're still sorting through the rubble there, the remains of what were not just homes and businesses, communities, but neighborhoods and families damaged by the terror of a tornado that ripped through the night skies. And all across the country, all across the world, the threat of the Omicron variant of COVID continues to rear its ugly head. Once again, fomenting fear where it may not even be completely warranted. Prince of Peace? Peace on earth? Sounds good about now, doesn't it? So perhaps like those magi of old, we need to set out on a little journey of our own this week until we too can get to a place where we can look upon the face of the Christ who is that Prince. Because once we have, also like those magi, I would suggest to you, we need to go home a different way as well. I don't mean you should turn left on Austin Parkway if you normally turn right or vice versa. I mean, we need to have an encounter with God that causes us to change the course of our lives if we're not following Jesus and living for him. And you may not get a dream warning you not to go back the way you came, as the Magi were warned not to go back to Herod. But God has already told us that once you see the Christ, you can't go on living as though nothing has happened. In studying biblical geography more, I've wondered just exactly how the wise men returned to the east without going back through Jerusalem. Jerusalem's just 6 miles from Bethlehem. You would normally go that way because that's the way the roads run. I've concluded that they may have gone the other way, though, around the south side of the Dead Sea. If you look at this little map up here, the little turquoise box on the bottom with the one on it, that's Petra. The one on the top is Bethlehem. Jerusalem's just north of it. So if they actually came from Petra, then they simply went down along that side of the Dead Sea, crossed over. How to get there? Or if they're going all the way back to Persia, it would have been involved going not through Jerusalem, but back over towards Jericho, crossing over the Jordan River, going up the King's Highway on the other side of the Jordan River to get all the way back to Persia. In either case, they went back different than they came. They went back different than they came. They also left a legacy, I think. See, even by the standards of the day, Mary and Joseph were very poor when they brought Jesus into the temple to dedicate him. According to ancient Jewish law, they could only afford 2 doves for their sacrifice, and Leviticus said that amount was allowed only for the very poor. 2 doves. So the gold in particular was perhaps the way in which God provided for the Holy Family to quickly leave Bethlehem ahead of Herod's murderous troops, hide away in Egypt until Herod was dead. And centuries later, when the Muslim conquest of Israel leveled almost every Christian church that had been built in that land, the invaders spared one church. The church that Constantine's mother, Helena, had built in Bethlehem over the cave that they thought Jesus was born in. A church they spared because the Persian invaders saw a mosaic on its walls that depicted the Magi, and they were dressed in Persian or Arabic clothing. What a weird story. It reminds us that God so loved the world, the whole world, not just his chosen people, the Jews, that when he gave his only son, he made certain that others knew about it as well. Jesus did the same thing after he grew up, feeding 4,000 here and 5,000 here so that both Jews and Gentiles got the message. Dear friends, God still loves the whole world. We don't have a monopoly on the mercies of God, but we can be awash in his grace. So as we come to Christmas Eve this week, let me suggest there's a simple question that maybe we should ask. Do you see what I see? Do you hear what I hear? Do you know what I know? The Prince of Peace has come, and he will bring us goodness and light. It's an invasion of hope, indeed. Let's pray.